Okay. So, like I mentioned, today we are going to be talking about we're going to be talking about um, sort of data management on the and sort of how we can monitor both our stations and our tag data remotely from Motus.org. And so I'm going to be going through um, more or less a bunch of examples of what we look at, how we manage data. We're also going to be looking at things like false detections because I know that's always a a point people are interested in knowing how to decipher what is a true detection, what is not when there is sort of ambiguous data. So yeah, we're going to kind of walk through a lot of that, and then at the end have a open question Q&A session that we typically have. So for those who are managing stations, we'll kind of start with, you know, how do we monitor data so that we know that our stations are running properly? Like I said, this ties into what we've discussed with maintenance, right? As we're maintaining our stations and maintaining the network, you know, we encourage folks to go out once or twice a year to physically maintain and make sure the structure is good. But you can always just hop on modus.org to make sure that your station is connected or make sure that it's running as properly as it can be. Um, and so I encourage folks to check on their stations more regularly because again, the more regularly you monitor, the less likely it'll be to have a lot of problems, especially in the event of say, if you don't check your stations throughout the summer and we check them halfway through fall and realize that, they haven't been working through much of the fall season, then there's a whole season that's gone out the window. So making sure that we're checking them in a timely manner is pretty important. So the first thing that I feel like probably a lot of people like to do when we go to modus.org is explore the data, right? So when we go up here to explore and we're looking at the map of all the different receiver stations. And if I'm again monitoring a handful of stations, um, the first few things I can check right off the bat without having to log into my managed data portal is just looking at my station. Let's just say this is one of the stations close to Athens that I manage. You can click on it, and the most important thing that we're looking at is the latest data. This is a station that I know is connected to Wi-Fi, so I should expect to see it connected, and it is connected because the latest data is today, December 1st, 25. So this is, like I said, the easiest way to just check to make sure you're at least connected. It is at least uploading data. And regardless of the Motus data backlog, which is currently underway, it should still be up to date in terms of when CTT files have been sent to Motus.org. It's mostly the sensor gnome files that have this data lag behind it. And so this is again, just the quick way to check to see if your data is properly uploading. You can actually, with this map, especially if you're interested in a region, and even if you're not the primary manager of a station, but you're interested in making sure things in your state or in your region are staying up to date, we can go to the map legend here and actually, instead of uh, have it denoted by the frequency that each station is, we can select the latest data. So basically it's saying all of these yellow dots are the most up to date. Those are the ones that are connected. And as it progressively gets greener and then eventually bluer, that is less and more and more time between when the last data was uploaded. And then if it's pink, that means there's no data that's ever been uploaded to it. So um, So, for example, all these yellow ones, they are connected. I've got a station here in Alabama that is sort of a greenish color. This is one that we installed last December. And when I hover over it, you can see the latest data is on December 15th of last year because we have not been able to successfully connect it to Wi-Fi yet, but it's something we're working on. So again, this is an easy way for me to just quickly look and see, yep, this one hasn't been uploaded in a while. We can look at a few down here that are dark blue that haven't uploaded data in several years. Again, denoted by that blue coloration, or stations that are like this pink color. This is a station that I installed in this past summer, and again, one that we're working to connect to Wi-Fi. So there's just been no data pushed to it quite yet. So there is no data being shown right now. It's funny, it shows the latest data is 1970. That's just the sort of baseline data, even though Motus was not present in 1970. But nonetheless, it helps remind some of us to make sure to get these stations connected or to go manually download them. Many stations are not connected. They're relying on manual downloads. So again, easy way to just real quick check, make sure your stations are connected. So for the next part, it requires that you are an actual manager or collaborator of a single station. And that's where we go to manage. And when we manage, we can mainly just choose manage data and it will bring you to the main manage project tool. The first thing you want to do when we're managing our data here is selecting the correct project that we're interested in working on. So if you're working on if you are a collaborator on multiple projects like I am, go ahead and select the project that you are actively managing. And the first few things, we'll kind of walk through all these different tabs just so you know how we manage this metadata. The first tab is the Manage Project, and this is just the project metadata about the description and also a citation in case you're using it. Sometimes it's more useful if you have a specific tagging project. Remember, this is when we say a project, that refers to both stations and tags because it can fall under either one. So, for example, this Southeastern Motus collaboration project is just stations. But if I wanted to have tags registered to it that I was deploying that was either funded by or part of this project, we could do that. So manage project is truly just, more or less the name and description of your project. Then the next tab available is managing collaborators. So this is where we manage who has access to in different permissions to manage the data and to manage receiver information or tag uploads. So if you are someone who who has help from other folks to help manage the data, for example, if you manage 5 or 6 stations, but you have someone uploading data for you from one of the stations that is a manual download, you want to make them a collaborator, but you really may just need them to upload data. They don't need to interact with the actual receiver data. Then you can just set that permission of data to update, or they could just read it, which means exactly what it means. We can read the data, but you can't interact with it, or no permissions at all. So this is how we manage people to, your collaborators in terms of who can help upload data, who can manage some of your station metadata, and also when it comes time to downloading data, if they're interested in analyzing tag data and detection data later. Okay. The next tab, which this might seem alarming, but data issues. Data issues is exactly that. It shows a handful of different problems that need to be addressed. A lot of them are not urgent and sometimes not super important, but it's still good to run through them every once in a while. For this example, I have 54 issues, and that's purely because I have a lot of stations under this project, and so they're bound to be a handful of issues and errors that I will be going through pretty soon. Um, so it categorizes it by whether it's a error with the project, so the project description, and again, it'll show a green check of like there's no issues for this category, none for this category. But when we go to receivers, which is what this project is mainly comprised of, um, there are just a handful of different things. I'm not going to run through each one of them. Some of them are a little bit more critical. So these red errors with X's on them. This could be uh, so for example, overlapping receiver deployments means I have some station that has two different receivers that were supposedly deployed at the same time, which probably means there was just some error overlap of a single hour or something where I have them deployed and I need to go change those deployments to make sure there's not any kind of duplicate of detection. Same with detections outside of receiver timeline. A lot of this can be test tag information, and that's why there's so many. I have 22 detections outside of receiver deployment. That likely has to do with my test tags that I was using. But so it shows up on the receiver, but not the deployment. Again, things that I understand as an error, but may not be a true error. A receiver that's actually not registered, that could be important. And then there's, lesser important errors such as missing antenna bearings for certain stations. Um, we want to make sure we have the correct metadata for that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. High number of radio pulses. This can help us tell us that we have a station that's pretty noisy. So that one might be interesting to look at. A receiver with no detections. So that station in North Carolina that I previously mentioned, where it has not uploaded any data and it doesn't have any tags being detected, that is likely one of the two stations that has no detections. But this might also be a useful tool if you're not managing directly, just to let you know that, hey, it's not detecting any animals. There might be potential problems with noise and or aliasing or things like that. And then same with no recent detection data, 6 months. That just means again, there hasn't been data hasn't been uploaded yet. Make sure to check on it. They'll give you an error every 6 months if it lapses that long without data upload. So again, this is helpful, and when I click on it, it will give me the exact station that has that issue, and it will give you a deeper description. So it is a very useful page to help manage your data if you are having issues with it. Okay, so back to the manage project. So that was data issues. The next tab is data access log. And this is purely just a log of when folks have downloaded data manually from the Motus site. So if I'm interested in analyzing data through, say, the R package, which I'll mention here in a minute, then it just creates a log of when people downloaded that data. So not a whole lot of data being downloaded, except when we were doing some work back in September. Pretty easy. Um, the next tab would be manage your tags. So much of what we've been talking about is station data, but if I were to have tags, which I don't have any tags under this project, all of your tags would fall, all of your registered tags would be in a list here. And I will go over those after I sort of focus on station stuff. So the second half of this, we'll talk more about tags, and I'll revisit this tab. Okay. I'm going to skip manage stations because that's one we're going to focus on a lot. Manage landowners. This is again just basically part of the station metadata of where those stations, the landowners of those stations. Again, that gives them special permission if you would like, but it's not a very important piece of metadata. Download project data. This is what I mentioned before. So using the R package, if I click on download project data, it will give me access to download a bunch of different things. And I'm not going to go through them today, but um, if we are interested in the actual tag deployments, SQLite tag databases, which is more or less sort of the documentation of each tag and their properties, then this is where I can come download data. Antenna deployments, more so this is more so metadata, and
Suppose that
then actual tag detections. Um, so if I was interested in actual detection data, so if we're interested in analyzing our data in R, we would want to download detection data here, and it's going to send us directly to the Motus R package workbook. And this will walk you through everything you need to know if you're interested in doing that. If we're interested in cleaning our Motus data, so if we have false positives that we want to clean up, a lot of noise that we want to clean up from our stations, this is how you do it. And again, it gives you all of the different articles of introduction from how do you download the actual data and install the Motus package to actually analyzing data better and cleaning said data. So this is your best resource in terms of cleaning data, which is not really what we're talking about today, just sort of managing data. If you are really just a station manager and you are overseeing a Motus station, this is not really relevant to you. This is more so for if we're, like I said, interested in getting more analytical in terms of flight information and departure time and tag detection rates and things like that. This is more prevalent for you then. And the last tab down here is upload tag registrations or detection data. And this, which sometimes takes a second. Oh, no, nice. This is an important one for if you are manually downloading your data. You download, if it's from a sensor station, you download 2 data files that are zipped and put into folders, the SG data file and the rotated data file. And this is where you upload them. And it's really just choose a file from your library, verify it, and upload. And you do that for both of those folders. If it's from a sensor gnome, it's just under one folder, both 434 data and 166 data are under a single folder. And this is where you will upload that. So again, just sort of the main things, because I know this is a lot to take in. Manage project is the metadata of the project description. Manage your collaborators who has access to this data. Data issues shows you, issues, sorry. Data issues is just alerting you to different levels of problems that might be within your metadata or might actually be coming from your stations or your tag data. Your access log is just showing who has downloaded Motus data. Managing your tags is where all your tag registrations go. Managing your stations, which we're about to jump into, is where you do all your station metadata. Manage landowners is self-explanatory. Downloading project data and downloading detection data. These are the two locations where we want to download things that have already been filtered and cleaned through the Motus server, and we are now interested in using that data and or cleaning it up further. And then uploading our tag registrations or our detection data is where we're going to upload our manually downloaded data. I'm sorry, this sounds very repetitive and I'm saying data quite a bit, but where you upload the data from your stations if you're having to manually download data. Okay? So managed stations is one of the most important tools, and that's what we're going to focus on right now. So when we're managing stations, here we can see I have a bunch of different stations that I manage under this single project. And this is where I come if if I've installed a new station and I want to add a new one. I will come right here and add a new station, and it will start the process of putting a new dot on the map, giving it a name, and the prospective start date and all those other things. And then it'll kind of run you through how to upload a new station. And it's very nice in the sense that it kind of walks you through it and you have to fill out one field before going to the next. Okay. I'm not going to be putting in a new station here. We can view this map as either all of the active stations. So that's these green dots. I currently have this view active. So these are stations that are currently active. Even if they haven't uploaded data recently, I still have them labeled in the Motus website as an up and running station, and hopefully data will be uploaded soon if it hasn't already. We can choose inactive stations. So stations that either were originally part of this project. So these are two stations that originally were part of this project, but then transferred over to different projects. So that's why they show as inactive. So this is Salt Trace Gap, which is in Kentucky, which Michael and I were talking about earlier. It's been performing great, but now it's just under a different project. So it is no longer active under this project. But this also would be the place where if you had a station and then you took it down for reasons X, Y, and Z, you would terminate that deployment and terminate that station, and they would still be left over here so that you could go back in time if you wanted to check older data, you could do that. So you can also just look at all stations that include both the active and inactive stations for you to manage. So when I'm interested in looking at a single station, and we'll look at a few different examples, we will first select that station. It'll be highlighted blue. And we'll come down here and it'll give us a handful of different fields. So the first, it gives us the name of the station. This is Livonia, Georgia Forestry Commission. It gives the Motus deployment number. So this number 13979, that is the ID of the deployment of that station. And this is where it provides the very high level metadata, which includes its actual location, its lat long, its landowners, which again, I could put in the Georgia Forestry Commission if I wanted to. This is more for, again, record keeping more so than it is any important metadata. If I wanted to change this, if I want to change the name of this station or anything like that, I would just go here to modify properties. And very similar to the creating a new project, it more or less sends me back to this page where, again, I could change the name up here. I could change its start date. what have you. But I don't want to do any of that, so I'm going to exit out of that. The next is sort of the metadata of that receiver itself. So we have our station ID, but then we want it tied to what is the receiver that it's using. So either a sensor station or a sensor node, and that ID comes up. So it's that serial number. This one is a sensor station, so it's CTT version 3023D, and then 364254245. Excuse me. Um, and this is the receiver it's tied to. Usually it'll be pretty easy to know if this is incorrect when you're entering that data, when you first register that station, because it will say that one is not registered to your project. So luckily, it should, if it's not, if you put in the wrong number, it will show up as incorrect. So it will make sure you have that correctly. Um, Again, this is where we can look at specific metadata in terms to the actual station when it comes to antennas. So the type here shows existing, so that's the structure that it's using. That's more or less just, again, nice metadata to have in case someone else is managing this station in the future. So this is often existing fire tower. The most recent data that's been processed is on November 30th. So that's yesterday. So it hasn't processed data today, but it did process data yesterday. So that's normal. It's usually a day behind and when data has been processed. The deployment ID, this is slightly different than the actual station ID. So this is the station ID 13979. The deployment ID is 10970. The difference between a station ID and a deployment ID, I can have multiple deployments on a single station, because if I decide to rearrange my antennas, add antennas, if I switch out with a receiver at the same location, each time I make a change to my station, I need to change the deployment. Because otherwise, if you think about how data is processed, say I have 3 antennas on this station 1 year, and now I decide to add a fourth the next year. Well, I don't want to just change that station and say it's always had 4 antennas, because that messes with sort of the detection probability and detection data. So I would just terminate that deployment and start a new one. And so that's what deployment ID is. I hope that's clear with everyone. Every time you change something about the station, whether that be antenna or receiver, this is where you will create a new deployment. So again, it's deployment 10970, and it's this deployment range. This individual deployment has been going on since last June when we first installed it. So I haven't made any major changes. I haven't had to change out the receiver, haven't had to change out any antennas since then. So it's just been running like this smoothly ever since. Last visited date, you can go in and modify the last time you visited the station. That's nice for your own record keeping. I think it's very useful. Then, if we were interested in changing any of this, so say I do want to add an antenna, things like that, we would go to deployment details, and I would want to edit this deployment. But here is where we add all of this information. It won't let me edit it unless I say edit this deployment. But again, it's all that information that I just said, but this is just where we manage it. So if I wanted to change the directions, the true bearing of these antennas, I could change those, the height of those antennas. If I switched it out from a 9 element to a 6 element, here's where I'd change it. All of those different things. And this is sort of, again, the page that you will find when you're actually registering a new station. This is all the information that you put in it. Um, like I mentioned, if I do change something about it, I can terminate this deployment and then create a new one. Again, we don't want to, one of those errors that we saw in my data error page was overlapping deployments, which means I might have accidentally uh, created a new deployment right as an older deployment was terminated. So there's might be just a little bit of overlap. So make sure that there is separation between those two. But yes, this is where all of this information goes. And we want to make sure this is accurate. Make sure that your bearings of your antennas are present. That's really important to have, especially when it comes time to folks analyzing the network coverage and things like that. And then finally, the deployment history. This is when we are going to start looking at our receiver timeline. To load here in a second. Okay. I've I think I've thrown these figures in every once in a while when we're talking about maintenance or when we're talking about noise. But this is definitely a graph you want to be familiar with when it comes time to, again, monitoring your station, making sure it's running smoothly, making sure it's connecting, making sure it's staying on, and also checking for noise. So you can do a handful of different things when we're looking at a receiver timeline. The first thing I want to check um, it is that these bars up here are the entire yearly summary of this deployment. And then as I scroll down, it breaks it down into each individual day. So each row is labeled here as a date. This is January 1st of 2025. And we have the hours of that day. So this is more or less so I can see it from a bird's eye view. And this is where we can start getting into the nitty-gritty. So just so we're kind of get a reference point as to what we're looking at. Each of these blue lines is a GPS point taken. Um, if you have a sensor station, there's a GPS chip on board. If you have a sensor gnome, you have to have a external GPS puck that goes with that sensor gnome. And if it is connected to Wi-Fi or Ethernet, that GPS is typically taken from, especially if it's a sensor station, it's taken from the actual Wi-Fi connection rather than the GPS puck. So when I'm looking at GPS reading taken, this is just my first sign that the sensor station was on and that it's connected somehow. So if I see here throughout the entire year that this is a solid blue color, this is what I want to see. That means there's GPS point readings taken every single day, every single hour, and there's not periods of time where it's not, meaning that it might be turned off or something like that. The next five bars here are just each of my different antennas. So this first one is a summary of all of my antenna data, which is sort of cramming all these four bar graphs into one. But I can select each one individually. So I have port 1 and port 2 and L1, L2. And for those who are familiar with how a sensor station is configured, ports 1 and 2 are my 166 antennas. So they've got a fun cube in them. They are 166 megahertz. And then L1 and L2 are my 434 antennas that you directly connect to the sensor station. So what we're interested in looking at is antenna activity. Every time we see this sort of coloration, we know that there is, to some degree, antenna activity. And ideally, when it comes to 166 data, because if we recall talking about noise, talking about maintenance, 166 antennas are sensitive to electromagnetic noise, other radio, there are a lot of other similar radio frequencies nearby. And so what we frequently get is a solid coloration of antenna activity because there's typically something in the environment, even in the quietest of places, that are emulating something at 166. So in this example, we see both ports 1 and 2 have some sort of consistent noise throughout the day. Ports 1, you can see there's a period, typically in the early morning, where there's not nearly as much noise, and then it comes back up. This is pretty standard, and you can see that it's sort of two-toned. So the lighter tone means slightly less activity. The darker tone shows an increase in activity. When we're concerned about noise, which is we're really only concerned with our 166, we're not concerned with our 434 data. We are primarily concerned when there is, say, an increase in this dark coloration. So we actually can see that if I scroll down, you can see it in the summary data. Here in October, we see an increase in pulses. Now, if I didn't know any better, I would think that could be just increased noise levels from a bunch of different things. However, I know from October 10th to October 20th was when the vast majority of wood thrush that were tagged were flying across northeast Georgia. And this station specifically, I think, detected about 50 wood thrush in a matter of a week. So this could quite literally be wood thrush being detected overnight. And that is what's showing this emulation of noise because we see after that period, it goes back to more or less a normal noise level. So again, when we're looking at ports 1 and 2, or yeah, anything that says port 1 and 2 that we know is our 166 data, we want to see this somewhat consistent soft coloration that shows that the antennas are working and that there's not too much noise. If we see that there's a lot of blank periods with very little coloration, that might indicate that you have a high noise floor, meaning nothing is being picked up. So there aren't tags being picked up, and there are not other things emulating 166 being picked up because the electromagnetic noise floor is so high that I can't hear anything. And that is a different problem of itself, which again, I encourage folks to go watch. We have videos talking about noise. I've talked about noise quite a bit in different instances, so I'll point you to that. I won't dive too much deeper on that today. And then you'll see that ports L1 and L2, this is our 434 data. Again, it doesn't suffer from noise the way that 166 data does. And so we're not going to see this solid coloration. We are only going to see these small blips of when there is some sort of 434 pulse that comes in. There is still noise. Not all of these individual tiny dots is a true tag, but a lot of them are true tags, especially here in September and October. So this is more or less what we expect to see with consistent antenna activity. Just knowing that, hey, my antenna is connected, it's recording something. This is sort of what we want to see. What you'll notice in ports 1 and 2 is that we have these synchronized periods of blank data, no data. And when I align them with all ports, we can easily pick them out. So from April 25th through the 29th, there's no antenna activity. And same with this period down here, further down, from August 19th through the 28th. Okay. We see these periods where our 166 antennas are dropping out. And this is what we've sort of talked about where prior to some upgrades to sensor stations, there's been problems with the USB boards overheating and fun cubes being dropped off. So they are kicked off and are not recording data. So we've lost data in those periods. And that's why it's important for us to go in and implement those changes to the sensor stations that I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting today. I'll be sending out that document on how to troubleshoot it. Like I said, most stations this fall were upgraded in the Southeast, and so they've been running pretty smoothly with these upgrades. But we can see in past data where fun cubes are dropping out, and we know it's specifically not just one antenna becoming loose and or something like that, because again, we see a synchronicity between two 166 antennas at the exact same time, which tell us fun cubes are dropping off, not antennas are being disconnected. So this is, like I said, pretty typical of what we see in sensor stations and receiver in both sensor stations and sensor nodes, and how our data is supposed to look like. There are other things that we can look at in terms of identifying some problems. So, for example, if I go to this station, which I know has had some problems, we go to our receiver timeline. We'll see there's a big chunk that is missing both the GPS points and our antenna data for both 166 and 434. And what I found out with this station is that this shows that it was unplugged. Someone came in and accidentally turned off the power bank that it was connected to. And it wasn't until I realized that it hadn't been connecting for the past month or two that I realized that, oh, it's been unplugged. And so ever since it was replugged, we see data go back to normal. Again, that solid coloration of the light hues in our 166 antenna data, and then our 434 data blipping in occasionally. So this is where I can identify a problem. Oh, it was unplugged, and unfortunately, we lost data during this period. And oftentimes, in this case, if I know the station's been turned off for that long, I will actually go in and terminate the deployment at the end of this deployment and start a new one. Because if I left it as a continuous deployment, that's telling the Motus world that it was active during a period that it actually was not. 2 months is a long time for tags to go undetected. So I would change my deployment data within this area where it's been turned off. Another problem for folks who have solar powered stations is checking to make sure your battery is staying healthy and staying alive. So here's a station in Huntley Meadows up in Virginia that, because it's closer to the woods, the station hasn't been receiving enough sunlight for the solar panel to be consistently powering it this year. And so we need to go in and change batteries and potentially add another solar panel. And the best way to look at that is, again, with GPS data. You can see this pretty kind of delineation of when it's being charged and when it's not being charged. So the white periods in this GPS data show when it's dead, and the blue period of, again, when it's charged and turned back on. And what we can see throughout the year, so this is the winter, this is January and February, where there's not enough sunlight during the day to actually keep it charged. So you see it's charged for some period and then it turns off, and charged for some period and turns off. And some days, probably on very cloudy days, it's not turned on at all. And then over time, once spring, it becomes spring, and then summer, there is enough sunlight to keep it charged throughout the summer. And then ever since the fall, again, because that battery was never fully recharged again, it's always constantly losing battery and losing charge. Then you can see it starts to lose battery again. And now we're at a stage where it's only turning on for maybe a couple hours each day. And that also means it hasn't been turning on at night when it's not being charged, which likely means it's been missing a lot of migrants this fall. So this is a priority station that we need to go fix because it needs we need to change out its battery and potentially, like I said, add a solar panel. So this is how we can see these patterns in our data and address the problems before you let a whole year go by and turns out, oh, my battery has been dying on me, and it's not been really recording a whole lot of tags. Um, so this is a very useful tool for, again, looking to make sure your antennas are working right. If one antenna is completely unplugged, you'll see that it lost its connection. We can see that it's connecting properly, that it's uploading data properly. Um, so this is, again, very useful tool. I advise everyone to check on this every once in a while. It comes in handy. You'll see a couple other options here: deployment timeline and deployment summary. Um, and we are really interested in deployment timeline for reviewing when tags were detected versus when there is antenna activity. And it's going to give you this very, very crazy looking graph that zooms all the way out through the entire deployment, which again, you can probably not tell at all what this looks like, but I can zoom in right here. And what we see is each vertical bar, we've now flipped our other graph and flipped it upside down to where, or flipped it on its side, excuse me, where the vertical lines are each daily reading. We still have our GPS fixes. That's that solid green line instead of blue. And then we still have our antenna activity. So antennas 1, 3, and 4 are the ones that have 166 data. And then L1, L2, L3 is our 434 data. And again, we can line this up with the same thing that we did and the deployment timeline where we're seeing, is there consistent data? Which here there's a little less consistent data, but it's also that could be noise, that could be a quiet area with less noise. But again, over time, as we scroll across, we start to see that it turns off frequently, on and off daily, which again is problematic. Another important uh, thing that we look for on this graph is these numbers up at the top. We see this number 2, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. These are reboot numbers. So it's just going to be a number of 1 to 9 or 0 to 9 as it reboots. And so as we make sure our stations are rebooting at least once a week, we should see this number change every 7 days of 1, 2. Here we have it was set to monthly, which again we need to change. So on the 3rd of August, right here, it was rebooted, and then on the 3rd of September, it was rebooted. 1, 2. You can see as it starts to turn off and turn back on, it reboots automatically, which with each of these sessions of turning off and turning back on because of poor battery charge. Um, but again, this is sort of where we go to make sure that our stations are connecting and rebooting. And as we go down, all of these individual bars are an individual bird's detection. And so if I go to top this top detection, or we'll choose this wood thrush from New Hampshire. We'll go all the way across and see that it was detected right. Well, let's just assume it's this one. It'll show up as these blue or different colored circles, and it'll show you, again, that date that it was detected. If it's a tag that was deployed near the station for multiple days, it'll continue to show up throughout multiple days. But this sort of gives you a timeline of birds and bats that are detected across time. And typically they're bunched during the different seasons, right, of spring and fall migration. Um, okay, so that is the station deployment. And this is, again, the most useful tools we have on Motus.org to manage our stations. I am realizing we have already hit the 1 hour mark, which took maybe a little bit longer than I expected. Um, and so we are going to save a lot of the tag side of things for potentially the next meeting or the meeting after that. Like I said, 2026, we're going to focus a lot more on tagging. Um, I do want to open the session for folks who are able to stay. I would like to open the session for questions and answers, and I see that there's a lot in the chat, so let me stop sharing here real quick. And let me see. If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand and I'm happy to answer that. Okay. Go ahead, Mac. As I'm catching up on the
Yeah,
chat.
so I put my question in the chat, and I could just looking for clarification. So we have decided to. You were talking about active and inactive stations under managing your project stations. We have decided to um, terminate deployment for some of our stations where we were just dealing with just batteries dying too often. So it's just temporarily inactive. So essentially, through December or April, we were planning on pulling those batteries, conserving the battery life and putting them back out before a spring migration. Is that still an appropriate way of, terminating and then reactivating sites, or should we probably still leave them as active, even though that's technically not true because it's not detecting anything? So that's kind of, scenario case I was wondering about.
Yeah, great question. And the answer is yeah, terminate the deployment um, between when it's not turned on, right? If we have a station that is not powered on, and like I mentioned with that other station that I found out it was turned off, I retroactively went back and terminated that deployment so that it's not reflected in the Motus data as a that it was an active station because then that's providing an assumption that that station is actively working and therefore there was nothing detected when in reality it just wasn't turned on. So yes, the best thing for you to do is just terminate that deployment. It saves all the station metadata. So there's really not a whole lot to do besides you terminate it and then reactivate it when you connect it again, and it saves all the antenna arrangements and everything like that. It's a pretty easy process. It's just a matter of terminating when you unplug it and when you plug it back in. That's a great question. And related to what Levy um, mentioned here in the chat, uh, stations in the Northeast spend significant time browned out each winter due to snow on the panels, something we don't have to deal with as much in the Southeast. We leave them active through the winter because we never know if the station is going to wake up and detect an actual animal. I don't know if this is right or not, but going back through the data and figuring out when the station was down and creating new deployments for each waking period would be tedious. Yeah, again, especially if it's a scenario where it's on and off for like a day, turn back on a day, turn off a day, yeah, that you don't need to create a new deployment. I think it's really only appropriate for if you notice that it was turned off for, say, several weeks at a time, or a month at a time. I would then recommend, um, terminating that deployment. But you're right, like it would be really tedious for every single time it turned off. There's still plenty of stations that, whether from a power outage or what have you, that have turned off for a day, and I'm not going to create a new deployment for that. Really just for significant, longer periods of time. No time. Yes. So again, another question here from Levy, or state, I guess just a note. Find that the stations often have the low-tech radios drop out, but the CTT radios still work, or vice versa. And in this case, only part of the station is working. Right. So when we're talking about fun cube dropouts, which I was identifying as these synchronized periods of lost data in 166 data, that's very specific to just the fun cubes. The 434 tagged data is still being recorded and still active. So um, for periods of fun cube dropout, which hopefully don't last more than a week or two, if depending on when you have that reboot schedule set. Um, that's not warranting a full redeployment of a station, or a termination of a deployment, excuse me. Um, that's just there's just lost data in there because again, there are some stations where fun cubes dropped out pretty consistently, and it would be tedious to go back through and change all of those. So, yeah. Um, Yes, been similar. Yeah, I see a lot of issues with batteries draining completely on a couple places. And honestly, I think Mac, that's a great idea of just if you've got really problematic stations, it's fine to just turn them off in the winter because that is less likely when you're detecting birds. I will say maybe, there's saw-whets out there. There's still plenty of winter species that could use those receiver stations. So if there's a possibility of adding um, two solar panels, that's one option. We use lithium ion batteries that are self-heated that I think work really well that help, especially out west, that help stay on during really cold periods and or snow-covered periods. But again, that if there's consistent snowfall, especially at really high elevations where there's very little sunlight, there's only so much you can do about that, and so you might just have to suffer with dead batteries and or removing those batteries so you don't get completely drained batteries. Um, yeah, Levy, I see a question.
Yeah, I'd like to put in a plug for the Rusty Blackbirds because you got Rusty Blackbirds down too, down in like the North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia area.
Mm.
So we do have birds that we sent down your way. So if you can keep any stations on, that would be great. But I understand it's totally reasonable to shut it down if you're going to save the battery.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, luckily this is not a it's not really a problem that we have in the Southeast. So that station I was showing that was losing battery over time in Northern Virginia, that one I don't think is problems with snow cover, but more so with it's just forested and it just,
Yeah,
I think it's good for everyone who runs a solar station to, as part of their maintenance, maybe switch it out, have a battery that can be charged at home and switch it out once a year, twice a year, something like that will help. But luckily for us, most of the southeastern stations, even in the winter, get plenty of sunlight and do not have problems with turning off. And we definitely don't get more than a dusting of snow, especially in South Carolina, Georgia, definitely like Florida. So luckily that's a problem we have to worry about, not nearly as much as y'all do in the Northeast. So
yeah.
um,
We one thing that I'm noticing is we've had our stations up for 4 or 5 years at this point, and so brush is starting to become a problem. So brush
yeah.
grows up and it grows around the solar panel, and so it appears like there's a decline, which there is,
Mhm.
but all it takes is a little bit of brush work, and suddenly everything is working back the way it was several years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that sort of just reminds me, we had a discussion on like maintaining stations, and again, it's all on we have on the Motus wildlife tracking YouTube page is uh, a presentation I did where we talked about maintenance, and that is a point that I think people kind of neglect is realizing, and even for antennas too, right? Like there's a lot of places where antennas are close to vegetation. Antennas start crowding around, especially our 166 and 434 antennas. That can cause some interference. So removing vegetation will help for a lot of different reasons, and it's just a matter of going and maintaining your station and keeping track of what works well. Mac mentioned the Morningstar SunSaver Duo controller works well at our good solar input sites. that the Sun Saver is historically what we started to use. But like I mentioned, we now, at least with ABC, we use Renergy's basically a full set suite of Renergy products, um, which includes their solar panel, their lithium ion batteries, both self-heated and non-self-heated, and their solar charge controllers because you can't, we found out unfortunately you can't use a Sun Saver with their lithium ion batteries. You have to use their solar controller. So we've kind of gone all in with that, but I still got plenty of stations on the landscape that use Sun Savers. So um, yes, and another point that Levy said, we want to make sure, and this is again part of the if you'll see the document that we have in terms of troubleshooting for sensor stations, the reboot schedule is really important. We want to make sure that stations are rebooted at least once a week. So setting that reboot schedule to weekly is important for both FunCube dropouts for making sure it's connected properly, like just a simple reboot cures a lot of problems. So making sure that happens is pretty important. Yeah, good. I see Mac saying, luckily our permanent power stations are in key areas that pick up saw wets and the like. Good. Um, yes, yeah, the lithium batteries. Unfortunately, yeah, the Sun Savers. The 10 amp hour sun savers, they do not, they don't work well with or they don't work at all, I think, with those lithium ion batteries. You have to have, and I can, if you're interested, Mac, I can send you it's all part of Renergy's. I can't remember the name of the model. It's unfortunately a kind of a larger solar controller, so it's not that nice. That's what I liked about Sunsaver. It's nice and small. This one's kind of bigger and bulkier, so you have to make sure you have space in there for it, but otherwise it does work pretty well. And like I said, I haven't seen many problems with it thus far. So, okay, I'm going to stop recording.